everyone, and welcome to the State of Cyber Defense Manufacturing Cyber Resilience webinar. Before we get started and I hand the presentation over to our wonderful speakers, I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping items. Today's session will be recorded and will also be available after the briefing. As you're probably already aware, we're using GoToWebinar today for this presentation, and you'll find the client dashboard on your monitor. Through that client, you'll be able to submit questions at any time. Please don't hesitate to do so. Our presenters will address your questions at the end of the presentation. In that client, there is also a handout section where you will find a PDF of the report which this webinar is based on for you to download. We are very fortunate to have leading Kroll experts today, Lori Iacono and Jeff Mako, joining us to talk through the findings of this report. And I will now pass it over to Lori for introductions.
Thanks, Savannah. So my name is Lori Iacono. I'm an Associate Managing Director on Kroll's Cyber Threat Intelligence team. And my team specifically, we do a lot of support with our digital forensic and incident response examiners. So we're kind of coming in when Kroll has been engaged to respond to some kind of intrusion or unauthorized access. And we also do a lot of work on the dark web, so looking on actors in the forums and what's being sold on various marketplaces. I've been with Kroll's CTI team now for 6 years, and prior to that, I was with an information sharing organization called the National Cyber Forensics Training Alliance, where I work very closely with government and private industry partners.
Sounds great. So I'm Jeff Mako. I've been with Kroll here coming up on 9 years now, but I've been doing IT for the last 30. Almost all of my background has been in IT operations, building networks, designing networks, operating networks. A lot of experience seeing here networks for clients that have been done well and some that have had an opportunity for a little bit more growth. So I currently lead Kroll's practice that handles infrastructure assessments, infrastructure pen testing, and I'm really here for this particular presentation to see if I can help Lori along with helping all of you understand better ways that this could potentially be done, or if you have questions about how you could better secure your manufacturing environment, we're here to help. So please, through the whole presentation, bring your questions up. We really want to hear what your concerns are and be able to try to address as many of them as possible. So thank you. So Lori, you want me to, I'm gonna run through this real quick, yeah. So if you're good. So the report that we've presented maps out the manufacturing landscape in a couple of areas. Every organization should have some level of detection and response, but also, we're looking at these particular pieces, looking at the intelligence that we see from over 3,000 incident response incidents that we investigate here at Kroll every year. We are uniquely positioned as one of the major incident response providers out there to see more of these incidences than any of other companies do. And then also we're in a position where we help those clients that have had an incident, as well as many clients, thankfully, that haven't yet had an incident through some of our offensive security and other portions of our practice to help companies better understand where they could be vulnerable in the future, as well as understand, are they secure enough for right now?
Yeah, and one thing I want to add here is in our webinar today, and there's also a copy of the report, I think that was put in the chat for the GoToWebinar here, so you can refer to that as well. We're going to look at a lot of graphs and statistics, and some of those graphs are going to be from basically, from a survey that went out to people in the manufacturing sector to kind of, rate their maturity and tell about some of the characteristics of their programs. And then we're also going to look at some graphs, as Jeff mentioned, covering our unique view into these things from Kroll. So as I said, my team does a lot of work, when we're engaged with, clients after some kind of event on their network. So I'm going to go through some of those graphs and kind of drill into specifically what we've seen from that in the manufacturing sector. So we're gonna start, oh, looks like we have a poll to start with. I forgot about that.
Let's do the poll. So we'd really like to get your opinions on some of these items. Just your poll answers, they're confidential. We're not sharing them with anyone, but we'd love to better understand you and your company and your experience so that we can tailor the rest of the presentation to speak to you. So if you could throw an answer up there, that would be great. Looks like we got some answers coming in. And they're about what I unfortunately expected. All right, so yes, as I unfortunately expected, cyber attacks hit manufacturing often. It is, as I'll talk more later in the presentation, it's not an easy industry to secure. There's a lot of pieces that fight against getting it secured effectively. And we'll try to talk through some of that. And I just want to assure everybody here, you're not alone in the difficulty of being able to secure your environment. So not an easy task to accomplish. All right. Laura, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is here where we're kind of looking at, as I said, this is perceived cybersecurity maturity. It's a poll that went out specifically to the manufacturing sector, and we kind of compared the answers, the self-report from the manufacturing sector to what we would call our average sectors here. So as I said, the question here was around how they perceive the overall cybersecurity program. So we see here on average, we have about 9% of companies of all sectors report they feel like they perceive their program to be low maturity. That was a little lower in the manufacturing sector, about 7% reported that. Now, when it came to those who felt like they were kind of at a midpoint with cybersecurity maturity, we had on average with manufacturing, we had about 65% of organizations reported feeling like they were, kind of at mid maturity. And then 28% of manufacturing respondents rated their overall cybersecurity program as being very mature. The fact that the numbers for average and manufacturing are pretty close, it seems to be that manufacturing is more self-aware perhaps than some of the other industries that we have reported, and the self-reported cyber maturity here is a little bit significantly higher than some of the Kroll's rankings for other sectors. So we go over to the next slide. This kind of talks into, we grouped our detection and response maturity into a couple of different groups, which we're going to see on the next slide. So we kind of want to break down the definitions because you're going to see these terms novice, explorer, and trailblazer, and this is kind of how we define these terms. So novice, likely to be using simpler collection and monitoring tools, may not have any actions for responding to high severity threats. And in some cases, these would be ones that would threat monitoring would be really their only defense. So maybe the only thing they have is some kind of monitoring. And they would have few elements in their program. An explorer, some more of the mid-level here that we would see, they would have some access to threat intelligence, like some of what we're going to discuss today. They may be using the monitoring tools, but they're also kind of creating custom use cases and rules to help them with known attacks. And they may be using multiple different tools to detect high severity threats. So these ones, like I said, they would have, whereas novice might just have one tool at their disposal, explorers may have multiple elements in their cybersecurity program. And then we would have the trailblazer. And in this category of maturity, we'd be looking at, likely these ones would be leveraging various sources of threat intelligence. They might be getting that in from multiple different sources. And the idea would be to, continuously improve detection. These groups may be, proactively doing threat hunting to look for unknown or malicious behavior in their environment. And they may, have many actions at their disposal. So they might have, a crafted out incident response plan that they can respond if they see this kind of suspicious activity as well. And whereas we kind of, went from maybe one monitoring tool to multiple tools, the Trailblazer would likely have a pretty large set of tools at their disposal for their program. And this is where we can kind of see here again the actual versus perceived cybersecurity maturity in the manufacturing industry. And only 11% of manufacturing firms have advanced cybersecurity or cyber maturity capabilities. So we have about 11% of the manufacturing firms having cyber maturity capabilities, but the perceived maturity is at about 28% are considered to be at this Trailblazer level. And Jeff, I know you go quite, often into environments like this. So how would you say some of those rankings add up, compared to what you see when you're actually working with manufacturing clients?
So I think there's the challenge I think manufacturing often faces is compared to other organizations that typically have shorter tenure employees that haven't been there for as long. Many of the manufacturers that I've worked with have staff that have been there 10, 15, 20 years and have grown into some of these roles. So it's difficult often for IT staff and security staff to really stay abreast of all that the industry has as far as tools and what is the current. It can tend to be somewhat insular, where you really don't have that breadth of experience. Some of the newer ideas and concepts don't always flow easily into those environments as the potentially could. So I think that's part of the process here for some of the self-reported pieces where I think there's a bias in each of us that if we don't know what we don't know, it's easier to say everything's fine. And I often find that when I quiz clients and ask them, a simple question like, hey, how do you see your security on a 1 to 10? 99% of the time, somebody's going to say like 7.5 because it tends to be the safe answer, but often it isn't the answer that is as accurate as what's really going on there with the controls that are in place. All right.
Yeah, so it looks like our next one is we have another poll coming up for our attendees.
Great.
So,
let's run it. It's a great question. What percentage of your budget is allocated to cybersecurity, the IT budget? So this one we often see some pretty wide variance, but I have a feeling I know where it's going to be for manufacturing.
Okay, well now we'll have to see if Jeff's right.
So I can't give you my answer until we're there, but.
And Jeff, is there a right answer to this one?
There's no right answer, but there's generally some guidelines. I would say if it's below, 6%, it's too darn low. So it should definitely be above that at this particular point in time.
Okay, and remember everyone, this is anonymous, so.
Yes. So, so 10 to 20 is a great answer as far as it goes there. More than 30, that's surprising to me. We sometimes see that for organizations that are coming out of an adverse event. As any of you that have been through an adverse event for an organization know pretty quickly that money that was difficult to get for budgets suddenly is found very quickly after a organization has had a serious intrusion. So that can definitely factor in there. The 37% that aren't sure, I hope that's because you're not exposed to the budget, not because you the budgeting process doesn't enable you to be able to have a continuous appropriate amount of funds allocated towards security. But it's great, some good answers there, but definitely it should be above 6. I think 10 to 20 is a reasonable number, looking closer at the 20 at this particular point, but all of these answers depend. It really depends on the industry that you're in, what you're trying to secure. We have manufacturing, clients that might be in high tech or semiconductors or other types of sensitive industries, and they typically are in a spot where the secrets that they have necessitate them spending more in security. And we have organizations that are in other industries where maybe it's not appropriate to spend that much on security based upon the assets you're securing. Okay, great.
So Jeff, you still didn't tell what your guess was where everyone was going to land.
I actually thought that people were going to guess less than where they are. So it's awesome to see that the people that are on this call have funds available to be able to target to help their organization get more secure. I was expecting there to be a far greater group in the less than 10%.
In the less than 10. Okay.
Yeah.
So our next section, we're going to talk about real world security capabilities. And on the next slide, we're going to look at, some of the response capabilities that, as I said, again, this was based on a survey that was sent out to manufacturing sector public to kind of answer these questions. And we see 25% answered that really, their only tool at their disposal was some kind of cybersecurity monitoring. And, like that kind of jumps out to me, Jeff. I kind of think about, are they referring maybe just to like Windows Defender or things such as that are falling in that category?
Yep.
So about a quarter, only some kind of monitoring that's in place. And then, above that, we see some of the other common ones. We only see about 8% doing the kind of, threat hunting. So that's like, more proactive looking for things within their environment. Looking at some other ones on here. 5%, that actually seems a little low to me, considering that we had 56% earlier said that they had experienced some kind of cyber attack, but we see only about 5% noted that they also had some kind of all of these things plus a business continuity and plan in place. Because obviously with some of the attacks against the manufacturing sector, the goal is to disrupt business operations, right?
Yeah. And the takeaway that I would give to everybody on the call is the items that are on this list, these are things that you should make sure that your organization has. They may not for you be the fit to do all of them in the exact order that's here, but if you haven't considered doing all of these items or have steps moving towards doing all of these items, you're probably a bit on the behind side from a keeping up with what you need to be keeping up with to keep your organization secure. Okay.
Yeah, so I think we have a poll actually on the next slide here, because we're going to move from this section. We're kind of talking about the perception of the industry and some of the tools that are in place, and now we're going to get talking a little bit more about the specific threats that the sector faces. So I think we have a poll here next.
We can move forward. Yeah, thank you.
And then we're going to be asking about, what you think is the biggest IT security challenge your company faces in terms of risk. And again, this is one where there's, no wrong or right answer.
Yeah, agreed. As the numbers are coming in, I don't want to bias it as far as the answers go, but a lot of concern about phishing so far, which we expected. And you should expect as well for you. All right. Yep, as expected, phishing is huge, always a huge concern. phishing could quickly lead to additional unfortunate attack chains downstream. All right, a little bit on the compliance side. Yeah, from a manufacturer's, compliance is tough.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and it kind of lines up with what we're going to look at next. This is also from the survey. We ask respondents to indicate what threat types are of most concern to the manufacturing industry. And we saw, by a long shot, ransomware is of most concern to the manufacturing industry. And in the next section, we're going to talk about why that was probably the right answer to be one of the top concerns for this industry, because it's definitely something that we see threat actors targeting manufacturing operations for those kind of attacks. And then kind of, next in line to ransomware, the ones that we were seeing were phishing, as evidenced in the last question. That is a big concern to the manufacturing sector, as well as data leakage. And data leakage, to me nowadays, like, these three all go kind of hand in hand, right? Because we have actors that might start with some kind of phishing attack where they're trying to steal the credentials. Once they have the credentials, they'll sell those perhaps for initial access, and then the ransomware actors will use those to get into the system. Then once the ransomware actors have a foothold in the system, one of the most common things that we're seeing them now is not just encrypting networks, but they're also exfiltrating large amounts of data from networks and then dropping that on one of their sites, and kind of using that two-pronged approach to really try to get their ransom payment. I think some of the ones that we saw, in the last poll, we didn't see any responses about, I think it was 0% said insider threat. Now we did see, in the official poll, we did see, insider threat ranked there, but a little lower on the list, compared to ransomware, actually was business email compromise. And we'll talk a little bit later about why this one might be one that manufacturing should consider more to be more of a threat. And it's not just manufacturing. This is just something we see across all sectors. But we'll talk a little bit about that one more in detail. Jeff, anything you wanted to add on that slide?
No, I think there's a lot of concerns, and ideally all of you are assessing those concerns on an annual basis, and then building your budgets designed to address what the concerns are. So, all right, why don't we jump through these slides?
Yeah, so this one's here. As I said, this is what we're going to see at what Kroll sees as far as the threats that manufacturing industry faces. And we actually see, as you can tell, email compromise is at the top here of what we're seeing. And we compared that to, the incidents in manufacturing versus the incidents across all sectors. So manufacturing is just a little higher than the average. With ransomware, we see it being, a little more than, the average as well. You see about 20% is the average for all sectors. At manufacturing, we see about a quarter of our manufacturing clients are infected with some kind of ransomware. If we go over to the next slide here, we'll look at the initial access methods that we see being used against the manufacturing sector. And that poll a little ways back, where we ask about the top threat and everyone answered phishing. I don't want to say that that's the right answer, because there's not a right answer, but I think certainly I think everyone's spidey senses were working correctly here, right? Because it's definitely something that actors are trying to leverage against the manufacturing sector. You can also see here, we have a category here for CVE/0 day. And we can see that manufacturing sector, we see a little more prevalence with that of the manufacturing sector than across some of the other sectors. And specifically, this is typically looking at unpatched vulnerabilities and services that are used. We look at, although we kind of lump 0-day attacks for where there's no patch available into this, the majority of what we see in this category falls into those ones where there actually is a patch available. for the service, but it just has not been yet applied. And we'll talk a little bit later about how ransomware actors specifically target those kind of vulnerabilities. If we go to the next slide here, we're going to look, as I said, specifically at ransomware. So, you know, when the initial survey was done, that was one of the top threats, and rightly so. So this is in our data at Kroll. We see manufacturing to be the second most targeted sector, but I always like to look at other reporting entities as well. Manufacturing is also number 2. If you look at the FBI Internet Crimes Complaint annual report, manufacturing is the second most common sector for ransomware. And also, if you go out and look at the shaming sites, this is where the ransomware actors are actually posting victim names. And if you look at those, manufacturing also comes in second place to being the most common sector observed across those sites. You can see it definitely is a major threat to the industry. If we go over to the next slide here, as I said, this one is looking specifically at, you know, we talked about phishing, and a lot of what we see with phishing is related to those email compromises. So a lot of the, you know, the phishing attacks lead to some kind of BEC. When we look specifically at our ransomware cases, the initial access methods look a little bit different. And a lot of what we see the ransomware actors targeting, as I said here in the middle, you can see the CVE 0 day. We see ransomware actors targeting those, you know, legacy applications that maybe the patch was available, you know, 2 weeks or 2 years ago, and they're still not patched. They're scanning. They are looking for instances that are not patched. They are also going heavily after external remote services. So, you know, coming in through, and sometimes it's an unpatched VPN, right? If we look at the known exploited vulnerabilities list that CISA has, a lot of those in there are the big, you know, the VPNs. So we see them targeting those, and also we see valid accounts being very common. And sometimes it could be a combination, right? Because if the actors can get valid credentials for an individual, if, let's say, the VPN doesn't have a multi-factor authentication on it, then it's pretty easy, unfortunately, for the actors to pivot into the system with those credentials. The next slide here, we are going to look at a case study of a, you know, case impacting the manufacturer sector. This was one related specifically to BLACKCAT ransomware. And in this case, it's just as I described. This was one where valid accounts were used to access the virtual private network. So that's how we saw them actually get into the system. Once they were in, you know, this is typical of what we see with the ransomware gangs. They're, you know, performing some kind of recon to kind of scout out the network, see what they can get. They're exfiltrating data during their time in the network. And in this particular case, they exfiltrated about 600 gigabytes worth of data before BLACKCAT ransomware was actually deployed and locked the networks. In this case, they had the 2-prong, they had data theft, and they had an encryption of their network. So Jeff's going to hit home with some lessons.
Yeah, so I think so we can flip to the next slide, and I'll start from there. You know, I want to point, Lori brought up something she said on the last slide that it's pretty important to understand. Although we have, you know, we'll track stats of the initial way that the threat actor might gain access, it's not simply one event that has organizations at risk. You know, a good illustration of some of that, of how many of these attacks are multiple modes, would have been looking at the MGM Grand and MGM Resorts that happened last year, where, you know, a threat actor called up, literally made a phone call to their help desk and said, "Hey, I'm Bob Smith. I forgot my password. Can you change it for me?" "Sure, Bob, we can do that for you." "Okay," hang up, call back. "Hi, I'm Bob Smith. This is my password, or I know I have my password right, but for some reason my MFA token isn't working correctly. Can I get somebody to reset my MFA token?" "Sure, Bob, we can do that for you." You know, each of the callers that were doing support in those type of situations look at it and go, well, it's safe to do half of it because we're not giving away the credentials without the full understanding that this is a two connected events to give access. And I predict we're going to be seeing more of the social engineering piece coming up in the coming years, because as systems get harder to hack in one way, threat actors are going to pivot to the next easiest way for them to accomplish it. The challenges for manufacturing are a little different than some of the other industries, and we tried to label a few of them here. That often in manufacturing, if it works, don't touch it. I've worked with companies that have production lines that might be over a week long from the start of production of some widget to the widget exits the production line on the other end. And at the same time, if the line went down, you'd have to scrap the entire week worth of inventory that's in some stage of production before you'd be able to resume. And 150-second worth of output for an organization, which likely is going to be more than that in an event, is pretty affecting to the organization from a cost standpoint. And so you become an attractive ransomware target because of that. But because many of these production lines run all the time, why would I want to risk changing something and have to reevaluate and retest all of the changes? And sometimes patching can be that way. I know even some of the pharmaceutical manufacturing environments, patching can sometimes turn into a lot of paperwork to redocument the changes that have happened in the organization. So if it works, don't touch it, fights against. Massive attack surface, manufacturing typically isn't stuck with just one building, it's multiple buildings over multiple sites. At times they're halfway around the planet, where one side of the planet creates software that needs to get installed on the device when it exits manufacturing on the other side of the planet. So everything is pretty interconnected for this, which makes it difficult to secure the entire organization. As we go back to it, downtime. Downtime is a difficult option. It's also a difficult option to get time to do the patching that needs to get done inside those environments. And then often there's a pretty heavy reliance on other vendors, other organizations. Just in time tends to mean lots of people involved in the process, which presents some additional challenges that way. So we know it's not easy from that perspective. All right, we can move on. So as a solution for it not being easy, we have seen many manufacturers say, we can't keep up with this, can we outsource this? All right. And this side is really looking at the difference that we see between manufacturing and the average staff, where there tends to be a higher percentage of outsourcing happening at manufacturing organizations versus other industries. And of that, we have there 71% that handle their security in-house, plan to outsource in the next 12 months. So it does seem like manufacturing is exceptionally aggressive on outsourcing. So as we get closer here towards wrapping this one up, I think there's some really important points here. You have a right to be concerned about it. Go ahead, Lori. Why don't you grab that?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in. I think that one of the big takeaways is, as we saw in the survey of the industry, there were concerns about ransomware, and those are definitely warranted. 34% of respondents said that was the threat of most concern. And like I said, when we looked across not just Kroll reporting, but multiple different sources, we could see that that was one of the second most targeted sectors. And a lot of those things that Jeff said, in the previous slide, talking about the just-in-time manufacturing, downtime is not an option. That's maybe exactly why these actors think, okay, this is one that we want to go after because they may be more likely to pay us that ransomware, so we're not, costing them money, so to speak, every day that services are down. But as we said before, BEC is also prevalent. And BEC is one of those ones that it doesn't get as much press coverage as a big ransomware attack, right? Because it's not quite as spicy of a story, so to speak. But when we look in terms of financial loss, a BEC is associated with about $2.9 billion in estimated financial loss per year. That's that's from the latest 2023 IC3 report. So it's a massive, massive in terms of economic loss. And like I said, it's one of those ones, and that's just of what's reported, right? There could be a lot of BECs that are happening that, people are just too embarrassed, or they don't actually end up reporting it to any entity. They just deal with it. And it does account for half of what we are seeing in the manufacturing industry as well. So, being, like I said, ransomware gets more of the headlines, but BEC is also one to watch for this industry.
So, great. So if we get to actions organizations can take, I think there's a big portion of it that you have to educate your employees, or you have to select third parties that are going to help you, that are up to date with the evolving cyber threats. It's changing very quickly. The threats from last year are not the same threats as this year, and the percentages of attacks are not the same between last year and this year. Understanding those deltas is important to make sure that you're spending the right amount of money on the right problem. One of the other pieces granted, we sell them, but even if I didn't sell them when I worked in commercial years ago, conduct regular risk assessments and penetration testing. You can't secure what you don't know. If you don't know where your risks are, you're blindly spending money on thinking that you're securing something, and that may not be the core issue that you have, or there may be something far simpler, less expensive, that you don't need that fancy tool that you're considering purchase to implement. Having security experts on retainer is a really good step to being able to be prepared for the next one. I'll also say that I used to like retainers from the idea that it enabled me to talk to management once and to get their buy-in for X number of dollars, and I didn't need to have every expense that I ran through for my security program have to get it approved individually. It made it far easier for me, and it made it far easier for management to have one discussion than to have many, many discussions. Pre-negotiated contracts in place so that you're ready. Ideally, if you did have an incident, you would already know who to call when the incident happens, and you would understand what the process was going to be, and it wouldn't be a scrambling point. You really don't want to waste time if you do have an incident. Many of the incidents on a network can go from bad to really bad in a very short period of time, and getting the right advice and the right guidance to solve that problem is really important. And MDR, if you're still using legacy antivirus, or you're still on the stock Microsoft Defender at your organization right now, I don't want to bash on them, but I will say you are not adequately prepared with those tools. It's better than nothing, but having a robust endpoint management and detection system is very important so that you can respond to the threats that organizations are facing nowadays. Great.
Yeah, and I kind of want to touch on, Jeff, one of the points you mentioned on that last slide was about, kind of staying on top of the evolving threats, right? And that gets harder and harder for institutions to do, right? Because when you're responsible for the, IT infrastructure of the organization, you might not be, checking the news every day for what's happening. And that's where, we Kroll, with webinars like this, we really try to help people. But one of the things that we're seeing a lot of right now is the buzzword AI. You hear that everywhere right now, and we're still kind of seeing, like, how is that going to play out in the cyber threat landscape. But one thing we have definitely seen in the past year is we have seen an evolution in BEC attacks. So we have seen threat actors using more text messaging. We've seen them, instead of using links, they're using QR codes. We've also seen a rise in phishing. So we've actually seen a couple documented case where it's a voice clone of the CEO. So they may actually be getting, real audio of the CEO that's publicly available. They're using that voice cloning then to basically, like we saw one case where it was, over 10 minutes instructing an employee how to basically, approve this transaction and who to send the account number to and all of this. And this was a fake fraudulent attempt for a BEC. So we're seeing a lot of activity there in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that the days of long ago seeing emails attempting to phish people with bad grammar, they're gone. It's far too easy to use ChatGPT to turn your phish into a ask for it to be a well-written marketing newsletter email in perfect English. So it's going to get harder for employees to discriminate those in the future. And I think we're going to see, as I said before, way more phishing and social engineering that's coming in the future. AI is definitely going to make all of this faster and cheaper for companies to do, which means we're going to see more of it at greater rates in the future. Okay. Questions?
So,
yeah, I just wanted to move things along because I think we have a couple of questions in the chat that we want to make sure we have time to address. If there are any more questions, please do add them now. And this is the time, and we've only a few minutes left. But one of the questions we have, Lori and Jeff, is thinking about Kroll customers who experienced a ransomware attack. Is there any correlation with companies who are considered to have low security maturity, i.e. no MFA or no 24/7 managed EDR/XDR?
Yeah, they got pwned. Yeah. I mean, occasionally people ask me, hey, what's the best thing we can do for our business? And I have to tell them that, the things that we often see from our incident response clients is a list of things that you shouldn't do, the things that weren't in place. So there's definitely a higher percentage of those clients don't have mature environments where they aren't yet using MDR, where MFA is only partially implemented through the organization. Very common from that standpoint to see more clients in that particular state.
Yeah, so I'll add on to that, and I'll say, even though you're exactly right, the percentage is higher, right, of those who would have the perceived low maturity level. But I've also worked cases on the flip side, right? Like we had a case earlier this year where we actually had an organization and they had not just one, they had actually like 3 different monitoring tools on their network. And the monitoring tools were working very accurately. They were notifying of everything the threat actor was doing. The threat actor got into the system, they were creating new accounts, they were moving laterally within the network. All of the alerts were firing, so to speak. So the tools were working, the alerts were firing, but unfortunately, ransomware was still deployed. So in that case, it may have been the tool was on, but nobody was monitoring it, right? So, in that respect, they might, in our categorization, if they had 3 different tools, they might fall into the higher maturity level, but yet, those tools weren't the be all end all because they didn't have someone kind of like actively monitoring and saying, hey, what's happening over here? Let's stop this. And, they could have potentially stopped it before it progressed to something worse.
Yeah, and that sometimes comes up when I have clients ask me, is this a good tool? Is this a good EDR to use? And the answer on that is often, it depends, but I would much rather have a B-class EDR solution running at a client site with an A-class teams monitoring and supporting it than I would love to have an A with a C-class staff monitoring it. How it's implemented, how it's managed, how it's monitored, how people review the alerts is exceptionally important. Us, when we're approximating threat actors, our goal is to minimize the amount of alerts that we throw and make the alerts that we do throw seem reasonable for this environment, so that somebody who isn't on the top of their game would just move past it and go, oh, that makes sense, it's okay, next. So having the right people is really important.
All right, I think we might have time for one last question. I know we're running a little bit over, but is segmentation of their production line from corporate network as effective as one might think?
Absolutely. So in manufacturing, where you are in a situation where you're not going to be able, I mean, I know for certain there's many of you out there that have Windows 7 still running on your lines, without a doubt. And those of you who don't, there are friends who in manufacturing do. What do you do to patch it? You can't easily patch it. So you have to come back to how can you isolate some of those environments. So it can be very successful to start looking into segmentation of the networks, but you do need to consider the movement and how you can move from one network to the other. Ideally, authentication should get done on the remote side. So if you were, in the worst case, you have Microsoft Active Directory and you authenticate someone on a jump host to get into the secure manufacturing environment on the insecure Active Directory, what's going to happen in that situation if you're doing it that way? The threat actor is going to pwn the corporate network. They're then going to pwn the box that's your jump host, and then they're going to use your jump host as the relay host to relay their data in and out between the two networks. So you really have to authenticate on the more secure side that you're connecting into. So that's an important piece to consider, but segmentation, very effective, very useful. It also can help some operational problems as well. So I would highly recommend organizations look at that east-west type firewall configuration rather than just considering the north-south that most orgs already have. Great question.
Amazing. Sadly, we've run out of time for today. If we didn't answer everyone's question, we'll make sure to reply after this webinar. I've also put the contact details up on the screen so you can reach out directly if you have any direct questions. A big thank you to everyone that has taken the time to tune in. We really hope you found the session informative. As mentioned, there is a copy of the report, The State of Cyber Defense Manufacturing Cyber Resilience, for you to download through the GoToWebinar client in the handout section, or you can also download it from Kroll.com. Once again, thanks a lot for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at one of our future briefings.